Welcome to Skinner and Chalmers' Weekly Roast. Today, from Memefield to Mount Fuji, Skinner and Chalmers go east.
Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting episode of Skinner and Chalmers' Weekly Roast. Today, Gary and I thought we'd take you on a little trip down memory lane, all the way back to our early days of marriage.
Ah, yes, Seymour, a time of youthful exuberance, questionable fashion choices, and as it turned out, a rather eventful honeymoon.
Eventful is certainly one word for it, Gary. Today, we're whisking you away to the land of the rising sun, Japan. We actually visited Japan quite early in our marriage, and let me tell you, it was an experience, filled with wonder, a few minor incidents, and memories that still make us chuckle to this day.
Indeed, it was a truly fascinating journey, and we thought it would be fun to share some of our personal experiences, along with some interesting cultural insights for anyone who might be planning a trip to Japan themselves, or even for those who just enjoy a good travel story.
Exactly! So, whether you're a seasoned Japanophile or just curious about a culture vastly different from our own here in Memefield, grab your headphones, maybe a cup of green tea, and join us as we delve into our Japanese adventure. We've got tales of bowing deer, peculiar slippers, transportation that runs like clockwork, and well, let's just say a game show experience we'd rather forget but can't.
Oh, that game show. Yes, that's definitely one for the books. But before we get to the humiliation, let's start with something a little more serene, shall we? Our first segment is all about bowing deer and toilet slippers.
Yes, Nara. That was one of the first places we visited, wasn't it? And the deer, Gary, you were absolutely mesmerized.
I was. It was quite unlike anything I had ever seen before. Wild deer roaming freely in a temple complex, specifically to Daiji Temple. And they weren't just any deer, Seymour, they actually bowed.
They did. It was the strangest, most polite wildlife encounter I think I've ever had. You could buy these special crackers, shikasen bai, and when you held them out, the deer would actually lower their heads in a sort of bow before taking the treat.
It was remarkable, such a unique interaction between humans and animals. It really spoke to the reverence for nature that seems so ingrained in Japanese culture. I remember one particularly enthusiastic deer practically head-butted you in its eagerness for a cracker.
Oh, you're right. I'd almost forgotten about that. Yes, one of them got a little overzealous. I think I still have a slight dent in my forehead, but it was all in good fun, and the sheer number of deer was astounding. They were everywhere.
Absolutely. They were considered sacred in Shinto for a long time, messengers of the gods, I believe. It created this wonderful atmosphere, this blend of history, spirituality, and nature. I spent ages just observing them. You, on the other hand, were more fascinated by the footwear.
Oh, the toilet slippers! Yes, that was another uniquely Japanese custom that really struck me. Everywhere we went, homes, businesses, even our hotel, there were these dedicated slippers just for the bathroom.
You were quite taken with them, weren't you? I remember you almost wore them out of the hotel room once.
Almost. Luckily, you caught me just as I was about to step into the hallway. Can you imagine the fox pass, wearing toilet slippers in a public area? The shame.
It would have been a memorable start to our day, that's for sure. But yes, the toilet slippers. It's a small thing, but it really highlights the Japanese attention to detail and their respect for cleanliness and different spaces. You wouldn't dream of wearing your outdoor shoes inside, let alone into the bathroom.
Exactly. It's all about keeping things separate and clean. And they weren't just plain old slippers either. They often had a slightly different texture or design, so you could easily tell them apart from the regular indoor slippers.
And it wasn't just toilet slippers, was it? There were slippers for entering the house, slippers for walking around inside, sometimes even separate slippers for tatami rooms. It was a whole slipper hierarchy.
A slipper hierarchy? That reminds me, also Dizenzo has some sort of indoor slippers. He is very particular about leaving the dirt outside. But yeah, slipper hierarchy, that's a brilliant way to put it, Gary. It was like navigating a complex social structure. But with footwear, you had to know which slippers were appropriate for which situation.
It was certainly a learning curve. I remember almost wearing the outdoor shoes into a traditional restaurant and getting a very polite but firm correction.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that. Yes, the look on the hostess's face was priceless. It was a gentle but clear message, sir. Your muddy boots are not welcome in our pristine establishment.
Well, I learned my lesson quickly. The Japanese people we met are incredibly polite, but they do have strong cultural norms, and it's important to be respectful of them. The slippers were just one example of that.
Absolutely. It really made you appreciate the thought and care that goes into even the smallest details of daily life in Japan. From the bowing deer to the dedicated toilet, slippers, it was clear that respect and consideration were deeply ingrained in the culture. Now, speaking of things that run with precision and respect.
Ah, yes, that brings us perfectly to our next segment, Transportation Marvels. And oh, Seymour, as a lover of all things meticulously planned and executed, the Japanese transportation system was a dream come true for me. Something totally different from the German trains. You know, the Duchiban. Delays of up to 4 hours are the LOL.
It certainly was impressive in Japan, Gary, especially the trains. You were practically giddy with excitement over their punctuality.
Giddy might be an understatement. Seymour, I was in awe. The legendary punctuality of Japanese trains is not just a rumor, it's a fact. The average delay is something like 18 seconds.
18 seconds. That's barely enough time to spill your tea. Our trains here in Memefield could learn a thing or two. I think the last time a train arrived on time here, Krakatoa hadn't even finished teething.
Quite. And it's not just about being on time, it's the level of commitment to that punctuality. I remember reading about a railway company that actually issued a public apology because one of their trains departed 25 seconds early.
25 seconds. An apology for being early. That's unheard of. Here, they'd probably just shrug and say, well, at least it left.
It truly demonstrated their dedication to their passengers and their schedule. It was a marvel of engineering and organization. And of course, we had to experience the Shinkansen, the bullet train.
Oh, the Shinkansen? That was an experience in itself. It felt like we were gliding on air, so smooth and so incredibly fast. We zipped across the countryside, barely feeling a thing.
It was remarkable. The speed was breathtaking, but what impressed me just as much was the efficiency and the cleanliness of the trains. They were spotless, and the seats were so comfortable. It made train travel a genuine pleasure.
It certainly did, and navigating the train stations was an adventure in itself, wasn't it? Especially Shinjuku Station in Tokyo.
Oh, Shinjuku, that was an experience. The world's busiest train station, they say, with something like 3.5 million passengers every single day.
It felt like all 3.5 million were there when we were trying to find our platform. It was a labyrinth of tunnels, escalators, and people. I honestly thought we might get lost forever. I was half expecting to see old Bartholomew pop out from behind a pillar, just to add to the chaos.
It was certainly bustling. But imagine old Bartholomew, a pet skeleton, walking casually down the train station. People would freak out, wouldn't they? But even with that incredible volume of people, it was surprisingly orderly. There were clear signs, helpful staff, and a general sense of everyone knowing where they were going, even if we didn't always.
That's true. There was a system to the madness, but I still felt a little overwhelmed. I kept a tight grip on your hand. Gary, I wasn't about to lose you in that human ocean. I never want to lose you.
I appreciated that, Seymour, you're cute today. It was a bit daunting. But it was also fascinating to witness such a massive operation running so smoothly. It really highlighted the efficiency and infrastructure of Japan. From the local lines to the Shinkansen, their transportation system was truly a marvel. Now, while we were generally impressed, we did have a few, shall we say, learning experiences when it came to cultural norms.
You're slightly embarrassed. Ah, yes. That brings us to our next segment, cultural mishaps. We definitely had a few moments where we realized we weren't quite as culturally savvy as we thought we were.
That's putting it mildly, Seymour. I think we managed to commit at least one minor cultural fox pass every day. but we always learned from them, thankfully.
Slightly embarrassed, one of the first things I remember was when we bought some delicious-looking street food in Kyoto. I think it was some kind of grilled skewer, and we just started walking and eating, enjoying the sights.
Slightly embarrassed, yes, and then we noticed a few rather pointed looks from some of the locals. It wasn't hostile, but there was definitely a sense of disapproval.
Slightly embarrassed it exactly. We later learned that walking while eating is generally considered to not be a thing in Japan. Not necessarily impolite, but it's not a big thing. It's seen as a lack of decorum and respect for public spaces. I guess you're supposed to stop and eat your food in a designated area or somewhere discreet. Or maybe it's because you should take your time for eating, which is always a good thing. Good for your digestion and good for the respect for the food.
It makes sense when you think about it. It's about being mindful of others and keeping public areas clean. We quickly adjusted our behavior after that. No more strolling and skewering for us.
Nope, we became masters of the stationary snack. Find a bench, enjoy your food, then move on. It was a good lesson in cultural sensitivity and digestion benefits.
My most memorable cultural mishap involved trash cans, or rather, the distinct lack thereof. I remember we had some empty wrappers and were wandering around, quite perplexed, trying to find a place to dispose of them.
Yes, I remember that. We walked for ages, it seemed, with these crumpled up bits of paper, and there were no public trash cans to be found. We started to wonder if we were missing some secret trash receptacle protocol.
Slightly embarrassed? Exactly. We eventually asked someone, and they explained that public trash cans were largely removed after the 1995 terrorist attack in Tokyo as a security measure.
Oh, I hadn't realized the reason behind it. That makes sense, though it was certainly unexpected for us.
Yes, and the solution is that Japanese people generally carry their trash home with them to dispose of it there. It really reflects the culture's emphasis on personal responsibility and cleanliness. Instead of relying on public bins, everyone takes ownership of their own waste.
It was quite admirable, actually. You rarely saw any litter on the streets. Everyone just took their rubbish with them. It's something we could probably learn from here in Memefield, especially after the annual running of the golems through town.
Indeed. Imagine if everyone in Memefield carried their own trash home. Sonic's hedges might finally be safe from rogue banana peels.
One can dream, Gary, one can dream. But yes, those were a couple of our early cultural stumbles. We definitely learned to be more observant and to do our research beforehand. Which reminds me of another interesting thing we encountered, something a bit superstitious.
Ah, yes, that leads us nicely into our next segment. Unlucky numbers and superstitions. Japan has a rich tapestry of fascinating superstitions, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and some of them were quite surprising to us. You, with your geological mind, Gary, were particularly interested in the missing fourth floors in some buildings.
I found that quite intriguing. It turns out that the number 4, when pronounced she, sounds very similar to the Japanese word for teeth. So, to avoid any negative connotations, many buildings, especially hospitals, don't have a 4th floor. They often go straight from the 3rd floor to the 5th.
That's quite a strong association. It's like our fear of the number 13, but perhaps even more pervasive.
It seemed so. But it's just a believing thing. Dizenzo's mom, for example, 13 is her lucky number. But for Japan, it wasn't just buildings. We also noticed that items were often sold in sets of 3 or 5, rather than 4. That was another way to avoid the unlucky number.
Yes, I remember seeing that in some of the souvenir shops. It was a subtle but consistent pattern, and it wasn't just the number 4, the number 9. Pronounced ku also sounds similar to the word for suffering, so that was sometimes avoided as well.
Exactly. It gives you a real insight into the cultural beliefs and how language can influence everyday practices. It reminded me a little of how certain gemstones are believed to bring good luck or ward off bad energy. Though, please be careful with such thoughts.
Chalmers, please not make a rant about homeopathy again. But yes, it's that idea of unseen forces and energies influencing our lives. We also heard about some other interesting superstitions, didn't we? like not sticking your chopsticks upright in a bowl of rice, because it resembles incense sticks used in funeral rituals.
Oh, yes, that's a big one. We were very careful to lay our chopsticks horizontally across the bowl. And you shouldn't pass food directly from your chopsticks to someone else's, as that's also reminiscent of funeral practices.
Goodness, it's a minefield of etiquette when it comes to chopsticks. We were probably lucky we didn't accidentally offend anyone.
We managed to navigate it mostly through careful observation and a lot of apologetic smiles. We also learned that sleeping with your head pointing north is considered unlucky because that's how the deceased are traditionally laid out.
Oh, I don't think I even paid attention to which way our heads were pointing. I hope we didn't inadvertently summon any restless spirits.
I think we're safe, Yamer. People know. You can't know everything, but it was all part of the fascinating cultural tapestry of Japan. These superstitions, while perhaps not based in logic, offer a glimpse into the history, beliefs, and values of the people.
Absolutely, it made the trip even more interesting, learning about these unique cultural nuances. Now, speaking of immersing ourselves in Japanese culture.
Oh yes, that brings us to our next segment, Traditional Arts Experience. We certainly tried our hand at a few traditional Japanese arts during our visit.
We did, and some of us were more naturally gifted than others. I'm looking at you, Gary, with your surprisingly elegant calligraphy.
Well, I wouldn't say elegant, Seymour, but I did enjoy trying my hand at Shodo, Japanese calligraphy. The way the brush strokes flowed, the concentration required, it was quite meditative. Though my kanji probably looked more like abstract art.
Abstract is a kind word for it, dear. Mine looked like a spider had crawled through an inkwell and then decided to take a nap on the paper. But it was fun to try.
It was, and we also attempted ikebana, the Japanese art of flower arranging. That was a different kind of challenge, focusing on balance, harmony, and the meaning behind the placement of each stem.
I think my flower arrangement ended up looking more like a floral explosion than a delicate display of beauty. But again, it was a wonderful experience to learn about the principles behind it.
For me, one of the most captivating experiences was Kodo, the Japanese incense ceremony. It was so serene and focused. It felt like meditation, but as you said, with something to smell.
Yes, it was so calming and mindful. The subtle fragrances and the ritualistic movements created a very peaceful atmosphere. I almost fell asleep a couple of times.
Well, it was certainly relaxing. And of course, we couldn't go to Japan without experiencing the traditional clothing, the kimono.
Slightly embarrassed, oh, the kimonos. That was an adventure. I remember the sheer number of layers involved in putting one on. It felt like we were being wrapped up like very elaborate sushi rolls.
It was quite a process, so many ties and sashes. We definitely needed assistance from the very patient staff to get dressed properly. And trying to walk in them was a whole other challenge.
Slightly embarrassed, I felt so awkward, like I was constantly about to trip over the long hem. And sitting down gracefully, forget about it. I think I ended up just sort of collapsing into a heap.
Well, you certainly made an impression, Seymour. But it was a memorable experience, and we did look rather dashing. If I do say so myself, it gave us a real appreciation for the artistry and tradition involved in creating and wearing a kimono.
It did. It was a glimpse into a different era and a beautiful aspect of Japanese culture. We even took some photos, which I still cringe at slightly, but they're a funny reminder of our attempts at cultural immersion. Now, speaking of memorable experiences, perhaps one we'd rather not remember quite so vividly.
An air slightly sad eye. Yes, it brings us to our most embarrassing moment in Japan, which we've titled, Game Show Humiliation.
Oh, Gary, just thinking about it makes my palms sweat. We really walked into that one, didn't we?
We certainly did. We were just wandering around Tokyo, taking in the sights, when we were approached by a very enthusiastic man with a microphone.
Yes, and before we knew it, we were being ushered onto a brightly lit stage with flashing lights and a very loud audience. An imposter, It turned out we had somehow stumbled onto a Japanese game show.
It was quite surreal. One minute we were looking at a vending machine that sold hot corn soup. The next we were in front of a live studio audience.
And it wasn't just any game show. It was something akin to that Happy Smile Super Challenge Family Wish show that sometimes airs at night here, but about 10 times more chaotic.
The host, a very energetic gentleman with a booming voice, didn't speak much English, and our Japanese was rudimentary at best. We mostly relied on bewildered smiles and a lot of pointing.
An imposter. I remember him saying something through a translator about how Japanese game shows were different from American ones. He said, and your shows reward knowledge. We punish. We ignorance. That should have been our first clue to run.
Absolutely. What followed was a series of increasingly ridiculous challenges. There was a segment where we had to wear oversized sumo wrestling outfits and try to knock each other off a tiny platform.
Oh, don't remind me. I think I pulled a muscle just trying to get into that outfit. And you, Gary, you somehow managed to get stuck and had to be rolled off the stage.
Well, I committed to the role, Seymour. Then there was the challenge involving incredibly spicy noodles and trying to guess the secret ingredient while our faces turned progressively redder.
That was awful. My mouth felt like Krakatoa had decided to have a little vacation inside it. And I'm pretty sure the secret ingredient was pure capsaicin extract.
And let's not forget the obstacle course that involved crawling through tunnels filled with feathers and then trying to catch slippery fish with oversized chopsticks.
I still have nightmares about those slippery fish. They were everywhere. And the feathers, I think I was still finding feathers in my pockets weeks later.
The whole experience was utterly bizarre. We had no idea what was going on half the time, but we just kept trying our best, mostly out of sheer panic.
The worst part was we realized that the prize money was supposed to cover our return flights, and we were not doing well, not well at all.
I remember thinking, are we going to be stuck in Japan forever, forced to participate in increasingly humiliating game show challenges?
Thankfully, through some miracle, or perhaps the pity of the producers, we managed to win just enough money in the final round, which involved trying to stack as many raw eggs on a wobbly plate as possible while blindfolded.
I still don't know how we managed that. I'm pretty sure I just got lucky, and one of the eggs landed perfectly by accident.
Luck or skill, Gary, we'll take it. We limped off that stage bruised, battered, and slightly traumatized, but with enough yen to get back to Memefield. It was definitely an experience we'll never forget, no matter how much we might want to.
You're right, Samer. It was a bit of a trial by fire, but it certainly made for a good story. Now, after all that excitement, let's talk about something a little more palatable than food.
Ah, yes. Culinary adventures. Japan has such a unique and delicious food culture, though I must confess, my attempts to recreate it at home usually end with me serving you well, you know.
Indeed, I've learned to expect the unexpected when Japanese cuisine is on the menu courtesy of Chef Skinner. But our actual culinary experiences in Japan were fantastic.
They were. One of the first things we learned about was proper noodle slurping etiquette. It seems counterintuitive to us, but it's actually a sign that you're enjoying your noodles and helps to cool them down.
Exactly, and it's not considered rude at all. In fact, it's almost encouraged. I remember trying to master the art of the slurp. I think I managed a few respectable ones, but I also ended up with a fair bit of broth on my face.
You did have a few enthusiastic slurps, Gary, but you got the hang of it eventually. And the variety of noodles was incredible, from ramen to soba to udon, each with its own distinct flavor and texture.
Absolutely. And then there's the surprising Christmas tradition of eating KFC. We were quite taken aback when we saw the long queues outside the KFC restaurants on Christmas Day.
I know, it seems so unexpected, but apparently, it started with a very successful marketing campaign decades ago, and now it's become a beloved Christmas tradition for many Japanese families.
It's quite charming in its own way, a unique cultural twist on a Western holiday. And of course, we had to try some of the more unusual flavors we encountered. Remember the eel ice cream?
Oh, Gary, please don't remind me. That was an experience. We weren't vegetarians back then. Maybe it would have been better if we were. I'm not sure I've ever tasted anything quite like it. A strange combination of sweet and fishy.
It was certainly memorable. And then there were the wasabi Kit Kats.
Those were surprisingly good. Actually, you got that initial sweetness of the chocolate, followed by a little kick of wasabi. It was an interesting combination that actually worked.
They were quite popular, and you know why Kit Kats are so beloved in Japan, don't you, Seymour?
Tell me, Gary.
It's because the name sounds very similar to Kitakatsu, which is a Japanese phrase meaning good luck, or you will surely win. So they're often given as gifts to students before exams or to people embarking on new ventures.
That's fascinating. I had no idea. It makes perfect sense why they're so popular. It's like giving someone a little edible blessing.
Exactly, and we can't forget the sushi and sashimi. The freshness and quality of the seafood were incredible. I could have eaten sushi every day.
Me too, and the presentation was always so beautiful, like little works of art. The Japanese really have a reverence for food and the dining experience.
They do. From the simplest bowl of ramen to the most elaborate multi-course kaseki meal, there was always a sense of care and attention to detail. It was a true culinary adventure. Now, as much as we enjoyed the famous sights and culinary delights, we also stumbled upon some lesser-known treasures.
Ah, yes, our final segment, Hidden Gems. Japan is full of wonderful surprises beyond the usual tourist hotspots.
Absolutely. One place that really stood out for me was Okunoshima, also known as Rabbit Island.
Oh, yes, that was incredible. An entire island populated by thousands of adorable, friendly bunnies. They were everywhere, hopping around, coming right up to you for food.
It was like stepping into a fairy tale, and the surprising thing is, the island has a rather somber history. During World War II, it was a site for poison gas production. After the war, the rabbits were introduced, and they thrived, leading to the island's current fluffy inhabitants. But the story is not entirely known.
It's a bit of a bittersweet story, isn't it? Such a dark past, juxtaposed with this overwhelming cuteness. But it was definitely a unique and memorable place to visit.
It was. I was also fascinated by some of the traditional crafts we discovered in different regions. We visited a workshop where they still made kawara, those beautiful traditional roof tiles you see on temples and older buildings.
That was fascinating! Seeing the skill and artistry involved in creating those intricate tiles by hand was really impressive.
And we also visited a Gita workshop where they crafted those traditional wooden sandals. The precision and craftsmanship were remarkable. It really highlighted the dedication to preserving traditional skills.
It did. And what struck me most was how every prefecture in Japan seemed to have its own distinct culture, traditions, and even dialects. It felt like exploring several different countries within one.
That's a great way to put it, Seymour. From the bustling metropolis of Tokyo to the serene temples of Kyoto to the unique regional specialties, there was always something new and interesting to discover.
We also stumbled upon some beautiful gardens hidden away from the main tourist trails, places where you could just sit and soak in the tranquility and appreciate the natural beauty.
Absolutely. Those moments of quiet contemplation were a wonderful contrast to the energy of the cities. Japan truly offers a diverse range of experiences for every type of traveler.
It does, and as our trip came to an end, we definitely left with a deep appreciation for the culture, the people, and the sheer uniqueness of Japan.
Indeed, and now as we wrap up our own trip down memory lane, we thought we'd share a few practical travel tips for any of our listeners who might be planning their own Japanese adventure.
Absolutely. First and foremost, book your accommodations well in advance, especially if you're traveling during peak season. Hotel rooms in Japan, particularly in the cities, can be quite small.
That's a good point, Yamer. Pack light. You won't need a lot of luggage, and navigating crowded train stations with bulky suitcases can be a challenge.
Definitely bring cash. While credit cards are becoming more widely accepted, Japan is still largely a cash-based society, especially in smaller establishments and rural areas.
And perhaps most importantly, take the time to learn some basic Japanese etiquette. Even knowing a few simple phrases like konnichiwa and hello and arigato, the thank you can go a long way.
Yes, and be mindful of customs like removing your shoes indoors and not talking loudly on public transport. A little cultural sensitivity goes a long way in showing respect for the local people.
And be prepared to be amazed. Japan is a truly unique and fascinating country, and we wholeheartedly recommend a visit if you ever have the opportunity.
Absolutely. And we'd love to hear about your own Japan experiences, listeners. If you've been to Japan, feel free to share your stories with us on our Discord channel. We might even feature some of them in a future episode.
And join us next week when we'll be discussing a slightly more explosive topic. Krakodo's recent rather energetic outbursts in the garden.
Air happy, you won't want to miss that. But for now, thank you all for joining us on this trip to Japan. We hope you enjoyed the journey.
Until next time, sayonara.
Sayonara, and so.
Say, minasan kikurida arigato, yonichiro.
Almashuroi nihongadata yo, charamazu, demo, sayonara.